Welcome to the show. This is YouTube Live, and my name is Brett. You're on my channel, and if this is your first time showing up for one of these YouTube Lives, I'm here every Thursday talking about container stuff, Docker, Kubernetes, Swarm, Cloud, all the DevOps things, and I've got two exciting guests that I want to talk about real quick. But before we get to that, I'm going to just remind you that you can look in the description for links to various things. You can get my newsletter for finding out all the new stuff that I'm working on and my course coupons. You can get my courses on Docker, Swarm, and coming soon Kubernetes. You can sort of find all the free resources that I have. But enough about all that stuff. Let's get to the show. On the show today, I have two special guests I'm excited to talk about. The first one right in the middle there is Jeff Nickoloff. He is All In Geek on Twitter. You might know him as a Docker captain and one of the co-authors of a fantastic Docker book that we'll get into in a second. Over there on your left is Stephen Kinsley. He is also the co-author of Docker in Action, and you can find him on Twitter as well with his little Twitter handle down there at the bottom. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brett.
So I'm glad to have you here. Sorry that we were running a little bit late, had some technical difficulties, as always is on this show. I should just rename it to Technical Difficulties. That should be the better stuff. So let me introduce these guys to you real quick because we've been planning on this for over a month, having them on the show. Jeff jumped in head first into the container space in May 2013 when he was still at Amazon. And after several public speaking engagements, he was approached to write Docker in Action, and then ditched his job at Amazon to pursue that full time. Along the way, he became a Docker captain, and he's calling in from Oregon Coast, where he's escaping standard responsibilities to hack out on a new project for Topple, the consulting company that he runs now. Welcome to the show. And Stephen, who you might wonder, you can see a little bit of his big old fish on the wall back there. He's an avid fisherman. Challenges most people, reading the wrong thing. Stephen helps businesses grow on AWS securely. So that's going to be a topic today, talking all about container security, often by automating the deployments of applications in containers on ECS. He's the co-author of the second edition of the Docker in Action with Jeff, and distilling 5 years of experience of delivering containerized applications. So perfect panel on the show today. We're all doing containers. We're all doing distributed stuff. And we've got a ton of topics to talk about. But first, to those of you watching live, reminder that we take questions live. So that means you get to throw live chat questions in. And later on in the show, if you stick around long enough, we will pick out the questions, and if they're actually on topic, we will have a great conversation about them, hopefully, that we will find useful. And, of course, you can always watch this later in case you got to go back to your job or your lunch break's over or whatever, or we get boring and you just want to fast forward later. You can basically come back to this same URL or this same channel. So you want to subscribe to this channel, click the like button, and that little dinner bell looking thing. If you click that, then you'll get notified every time we go live each week. So I think the first topic here is, can you talk a little bit about your experience with deploying containers? And, we've all been doing it, sounds like, for years. Can you wrap that up in a few minutes? Is that even possible to do, Jeff?
Sure. I don't know if it's possible to wrap it all up, but so I'm not sure where most people's background comes from, but we were kind of doing, at Amazon, we were doing container-like things, like a lot of companies were for a long time, even before Docker and before we had really popularized the term container. I was even doing it when I was at Arizona State, but they all looked like Symlink farms or a whole bunch of other really kind of grotesque ways that we were isolating these file systems or getting fancy pointers to different file systems that we could flip around at deploy time. But really, I think it's helped people not so much change the way that they think about stuff, because I think that we've been using file system isolation to think about deployment for a long time, even when we were doing virtual machines. But it's definitely helped us using. It kind of forces us to. And I think that's refreshing, which is just a little bit of a philosophically purist. But I mean, it's been great. I think we've gotten a lot more agile. We've gotten a lot more, like, I think one of the biggest ways it's impacted me in the way that we work is we're able to test a lot more easily with like our functional testing capabilities have kind of gone crazy, which is fantastic. So I'm kind of ranting, but I mean, aside from reading the book, like, I mean, it's been a crazy, like, what is it, like 5 years that I've been doing this now, and help have a lot of really great conversations with people along the way. So it's been pretty awesome so far.
Yeah. That's a good wrap. I like that. Stephen, you got anything to add to that? Can you one up him on the best analogies?
Well, I was really adopting containers to solve the application distribution and like the basic distribution and runtime problems that I was just tired and frustrated of dealing with. So, I come from a software development and product development background, and I was just frustrated with getting my applications out there and getting the right things out there and doing that quickly and getting a fast path to production. And so Docker really helped me solve a whole bunch of problems by using containers and the Docker image format. So, that I'm like, woohoo! And we've gone from this world where you had like very simple deployments, and in fact, the orchestration system that I initially helped set up and popularize, like, that one is actually still in use. Like, it's fascinating. I mean, and I keep encouraging them to move off it, but like, there's way better stuff now.
Right.
But like, the fascinating thing is that it actually still works.
Right.
Yeah. I do have a client that they did adopt Docker fairly early, but it was before there was any container orchestration that had really matured, and they just set up a whole bunch of automation around auto scaling groups on AWS, and they basically have they've isolated by auto scaling group instead of by Docker, Swarm Stack or whatever. And it's funny. It's to get them over the hump to orchestration. It's a whole lot of work with very little payout. It certainly adds flexibility for anything new, but they're kind of set. They don't have a lot of new apps deploying constantly. They update the same thing over and over. So they need a good deployment solution, and they kind of have all that. Like, they use the AWS tooling, so they keep coming back. I don't know, like every 6 months and saying, "Hey, any new reasons for us to use orchestration?" It's like,
so I have a client in that same situation.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. Like, I probably 4 or 5 times in the last 2 years, I've had these really meaningful conversations where people keep bringing up the word legacy, and whether it's legacy software or legacy orchestration system, or like just their legacy way of doing these things, of doing things. And I have to keep having these conversations around, like, well, what does that actually mean to you, right? And for some people, they're just like, oh, it's old. And it's like, sure, yes, some time has passed. But I promise you, you can write software today that will be legacy tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so what really, like, getting down to, like, what really is it that makes it legacy, this super bad word? And so then I have to start having questions around, like, okay, well, let's narrow it down. Like, let's talk about, like, hiring pool. Like, are you using a language that you consider legacy? Why do you consider it legacy? Well, because, like, 1 in 10,000 people, you can only hire like 1 in 10,000 people because of this constraint.
Right.
That might get legacy. Or if it's a system that no one understands in your company, like, you've had the brain drain or human capital flight has just taken all of that away, then that has become legacy, right? And so I always come back around. It's like, well, if you have an old system that is well documented, that works and fulfills its needs, that isn't facing like a scaling strain or something like that, then I'm not sure, like, then like why replace it, right? Like this isn't like, and even if you do come into a case where like it works, you just don't know about it, like maybe just take the time to learn about it. It would probably be way cheaper than replacing it. So, like when it comes to like, there was, I think Steven shared like one of his favorite Hacker News threads a couple years ago, which was like, it was just an open question for like, hey, how are you deploying containers? Like, how are you orchestrating containers? Like this was like before all the orchestrators really took off. And it was awesome because rather than a whole bunch of like weird pedantic conversation, there was like 1,000 people who just threw up 1,000 different major configurations for how they were doing this stuff. And it was working for them. They were all really excited to share it. And I can't even imagine how many of those are still in use today for those early adopters that got something working.
Right.
So,
I mean, I think it's a lot, like, because even the argument or the conversation around like, hey, let's consolidate what you're doing over here with what you're doing over here, and like get everyone to Kubernetes or ECS or whatever it is. Like, you end up with these discussions about like, well, I need, that work needs to be funded, and like you actually have to go do it. And a lot of that doesn't tie back to things that you're going to be measuring, like throughput of changes or latency of changes, or like risks that you're talking about.
Right.
So, I think it's like, and actually having a good discussion around what people's strategy is, that can be a rare kind of discussion.
Yeah.
And doing that in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, rare in the fact that you kind of have to force it, right? Like a lot of, I think with a lot of new clients, especially for me at least, that the conversation. Well, and it's partly my fault because I advertise myself as a container guy, and so they very quickly talked to me about containers, and then I started asking about the deeper plan and the measurable outcomes and stuff like that. The things that kind of DevOps are sort of supposed to drive, and there's not a lot of it, right? It's not heavily based on that. It's heavily based on, well, we were told to adopt this technology or by our management, or we were told by the internet that this technology is what we need to use, and that once we do it, then we'll figure out our benefits and our advantages. When sometimes I've seen certain cases where, especially with orchestration, people have deployed orchestration and they actually lose visibility and increase risk. Especially with security, because they just don't. That those aren't fundamentals on the get-go of outcomes, right? So
it's a madness. Like the I don't know. Maybe I don't want to start talking about this, but like just the marketing component to tech adoption, or the marketing component to really anything. So like if you like trip and fall into a random corner of the web, like it's really easy to think that no one has ever written any software that doesn't run on Node.js. Right? Like there is no other build tool or packaging tool other than NPM.
Yeah.
But if you trip and fall another way, then you'll like discover that like, I don't even know, some ridiculous number of questions on like Stack Overflow or like about C++, like random C++ for embedded systems questions, and it's just. So it's really easy to fall into the echo chambers, especially when it's like the echo chambers are designed to capture as many people as possible, as we've seen with like a lot of the CNCF stuff. Like don't get me wrong, like they've got a lot of great tech and they've got a lot of really powerful people behind them and like great engineers across the board, and they're well intentioned, but like the orchestration war was kind of a funny thing because it was mostly a marketing battle.
Yeah.
And like I wrote about in 2017, like it wasn't always the most like with the secrets article, like it really wasn't the most honest marketing battle at times, right? Like it turned into a checkbox war and whatever.
Yeah, wasn't that on me? Did you do that on Medium?
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to pull that out for people.
Yeah, I think anytime someone says de facto standard,
yeah,
that's a tell.
Right.
And I now pick up on that whenever I get feedback about something or I'm reading something, when somebody says that X is the de facto standard for Y, and X is not 15 years old or 10 years old, like,
Or if it really isn't,
I'm not sure it's the jury is back yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it the secrets and liabilities?
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, I mean, it was really like intended to be a survey of like how to manage secrets in containers in early 2017, and I kind of like, because like 2 or 3 products had just rolled it out, including Docker, and Rancher, and a couple of others, and so we kind of I tried to come up with some like, I'm an application guy. Like, I come across as very DevOps heavy because that's kind of what I've been doing publicly for like since 2014, since I left Amazon. But really, like, I focus on DevOps a lot because as an application developer, I really truly believe like I can't understand my application if I don't understand how to run it. And so I kind of stepped back and said, like, as an app dev, as a DevOps person, like, what do I want? Like, with good secret fundamentals in mind, like, what would I really want out of a secret management system? And came up with some pretty objective criteria, and then evaluated like 6 or 7 different things on it, and kind of came down to Kubernetes and discovered that we had been lied to since 2014 about the viability of secrets. So like that was particularly crappy. But they responded in a very positive way. Like, a bunch of people were really like vocally self-critical, and they had a pretty good round 2 strategy for dealing with like how to keep content in Kubernetes safe. I have no idea to what degree it's been adopted because it's not like a default tool. But it's better than nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the road for every team is so different. I mean, in terms of maturing and adopting technology, and that it's you mentioned the echo chambers, and I was at the time I was thinking, yeah, and one of the problems is Google search will create an echo chamber for you in your own searching. So one of the challenges in tech is like there's a lot of times where I want my search engine to give me the things I want. It knows I like Docker, the container system, and not Docker the pants. So it doesn't show me pants, right, whenever I search things, because it knows me. But the challenge is when you're trying to understand opinion, right, or trying to understand whether to adopt a tool, there's almost a certain, I feel like we all need to make a habit in tech that we go use DuckDuckGo or some other search engine that will make us generic, so that we get a more valid sort of non-echo chamber result out of our searching. Because I mean, a lot of times people talk about political stuff with that, but I think it's just as bad in tech or any other thing you're researching. I'm into sous vide cooking, which is cooking with water. And if I search about sous vide, I'm only going to find, Google's only going to show me all of the recipes and all the positive things. It's not usually going to show me any other types of cooking that are alternate to sous vide.
Just like, I mean, really, like search engines in general, not even like the adaptive result kind of stuff that you see with like Google or like reinforcement algorithms, but like just search engines in general, like search is absolutely awful for discovering unknown unknowns. And as a human, like as soon as you get like a little bit of flavor for like some keywords that you don't know something about, like those become your hooks. So most people are like, hey, they want to know like realistically, like how can they achieve like automated high availability, or like automated like downtime reaction, or like really like the orchestration of applications wherever they are. And one of the first keywords they're going to hit is Kubernetes. And so that's what they're going to be searching for. So of course it's going to just reinforce based on the fact that it's the only term that they know. Just like, so when in 2013, 2014, when Docker really boomed, like really no one, like a container was literally like something you put something in. Like it was No one like was super familiar with the term of the abstraction. And so when people were searching for how to do this thing, the thing that they searched for was Docker.
Yeah.
Right. That was the entity, the named thing that they could wrap their mind around, because it was the tool. It was also a company. And so, like, especially early on, you'd be like, how do I get things in the Dockers? Or like, how do I Dockerize this thing? Or I want to use Docker for running on AWS. And it was like, well, it was the Docker story for a lot of people. It wasn't the, how do I isolate my applications or use containers? So like, I hate search engines. Like you have to get like really inventive. Like they're kind of garbage.
So if this was one of those podcasts or shows where they re-record, they edit it all up and they put the something from the middle of the show into the beginning as a teaser, it would be, so basically we hate search engines.
Yeah.
They create bias. They create echo chambers.
They're just awful for discovery, right? Like they're just garbage for knowledge discovery.
Yeah.
So, but I think this is another way of talking about how the convenience of search has really taken us away from more structured ways of learning and understanding a topic. So, whether you're building something big or small, like, there's a bunch of questions that you should be answering in any design, or like whether some solution is going to work in a particular situation. And the probability of that, of someone having just the right thing pop up in the top 3 search results for your situation is close to nil. And they're certainly not going to describe like all of the pain. Like there's gonna be all kinds of bias towards talking about the good stuff, or maybe one of the problems. You know, as long as it's like technically fun, like, my DNS search results got messed up because console was doing 512 UDP, 512 byte packets, and the whatever service mesh was doing 496 or whatever it is. Okay.
But you would never know to look for that problem until you encountered it yourself.
Right.
And when I get that random error and I search Google and it says, sorry, 0 out of 5 billion results found, that takes a true engineer to go, okay, I'm going to fix it anyway.
Right.
Someone else hasn't fixed it for me. I'm going to have to figure this out. I think we had a conversation a couple of podcasts ago around the way that I learned in the 90s about how to deploy. We were shifting to TCP/IP as the network protocol, and I went to Barnes & Noble, and because I was in the Navy at the time, so I didn't have the money, so I would sit in Barnes & Noble and read the TCP/IP Unleashed book, which was this thick, and then I would go back to work and try to implement it.
Is that the Stevens book?
Oh, I don't even know.
Okay.
Yeah, that was so long ago. I never owned it. I didn't want to spend $45 on a book. So it was tough at the time. I mean, I was making minimum wage essentially. So it was hard for me to justify that. Which is a good segue into your book. Let's show off some coupon codes and some what we're talking about here. Let me see if I can. So Docker in Action 2nd edition. And if you look up at the top, there is a discount code that gets you 40% off of this top book on Docker. So tell me about it. Somebody give me the elevator pitch.
The elevator pitch. So this is a book for people who want to find out what containers are about, roughly how they work, and why it's important to have an idea roughly how they work. It's really like a nice early book. It's not cookbooky. There's a couple of really strong examples in there for like patterns to follow or whatnot. But we were trying to be like a very kind of medium level. This is how to use this thing. So if you go into it looking for like, hey, I have this Node.js app that listens on port 3000. I want to know exactly how to do it in the first paragraph of the book. Like, you're not going to enjoy the book. If you are a sysadmin and you're like, I have to build a Kubernetes cluster and I need to know exactly what parameters to put into this thing, you're not going to enjoy that. If you want to know roughly, like if you want a strong idea what containers are, why they're powerful, roughly how they work, and good patterns for applying it, like this is a great place to start.
Cast. I like it. I like that it's giving me that option. All right, we're back. So continued drama on my technology front. I think I've still got issues. So thanks for hanging around. The cool thing is we learned last week is that YouTube actually clips the videos so that there's not, when people rewatch, there won't be a delay. So in case you're wondering why we just stopped talking and then came right back, it's because my audio crashed. So hopefully, so yes, the coupon to the book is in chat. I believe we put that in chat, and you can get 40% off. So we were talking briefly about patterns, because I think in containers often we focus on the tools. We got to have Docker, we got to have Kubernetes, and one of the challenges about both, I think, Docker and Kubernetes, and especially Kubernetes, is they don't have patterns built into them on how to use them. So there's lots of unopinionated tools are great when you know the right way to use them. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think that speaks directly to some of the new content. So when the first edition was written, we didn't have patterns yet for building images and image pipelines and so forth. So that's the topic of chapter 10, and like different ways you can tag things and some of the implications of different schemes. As well as like how do I slice up a container cluster so that we have different security zones, or that we protect secrets, or what have you. And those are things that we know now, or at least we know more about now.
Right. Right.
And especially on the security side, I think we still have a long way to go in terms of merging security with application delivery. But a lot, there are people working on that.
Yeah.
The big question is whether or not people really care, I think.
Yeah. So as far as patterns in the book go, I wrote the first edition in the third part knowing specifically that was going to be the thing that was going to change. And I straight up said it in the text, like, hey, like we're going to talk about Swarm V1, knowing that this entire space is about to explode, but kind of like with the knowing, like, here are the things to think about in this space. These are the things that are kind of important. This is like how clusters work, et cetera. In this book, we were focusing specifically on Swarm because it's a great little orchestrator that people can spin up straight away. And because really, like, we're actually kind of on the other side of this world where people are kind of they're if you understand the idea of running service software and kind of like the goals behind it, then most of the knowledge is very portable. There's some bit between various orchestrators. Like there's some minor details, like, hey, how do I describe DNS entries, or how do I describe how many replicas, or whether or not this thing should be replicated, or how do I attach disk, and how do I reference that? Like those are very much so details. Like the big ideas are really what we try to hit in chapter 11, and then refine on and get a little bit more specific into features of Swarm in chapter 12 and so on. But that wasn't really something that we could talk about too generally in the first edition. So the second edition has got a lot more content around that, and I think it's really valuable, and it's generalist that you can kind of take wherever you go. So
that's pretty cool. That's cool that and my talks, when I do whether it's workshops or presentations, I try to focus more about opinionated patterns that I like and that I've seen success with other people, rather than here's a list of features. Now do with them what you wish. And it's
Right.
cool that you're adding that to the book to add that value. Like it would, I think giving someone a tool, it's kind of like giving someone a hammer and saying, good luck. Don't teach them how to swing it. Don't teach them what they're supposed to hit with it. Just say it's a thing. You hit things.
And
with
like,
it.
I would never want to write that book.
Yeah.
Like I would never want to. Like I just am not. I'm not terribly like it would age incredibly poorly.
Yeah.
Especially like I can't even imagine. I think I was telling Steven this. Like I can't imagine writing a Kubernetes book. Like that would be I have a lot of respect for the people who did it because like you just got to be a glutton for punishment because that thing changes so much.
Yeah.
Like it like it's so big, so many pieces to it. It changes so much.
Yeah, and versions don't age well, right? Versions of a tool don't age well.
Right. And like honestly, between the first edition and second edition of Docker in Action, because we focused very much so on like the user experience components, it was most of it aged really well. So that was refreshing.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that by and large, all of the features that we talked about in the first edition still worked. But we needed to refresh it for certain aspects for like how people tend to use those things now, and accommodate what we've learned and talk about like new features that have been added to say the Docker run command.
Yeah. Nigel Poulton, a Pluralsight and now a Cloud Guru author, is doing a Kubernetes This Month show. I think he just finished his second one on a Cloud Guru on YouTube. And I think it's fantastic that he's talked about the last two shows briefly about the releases of Kubernetes as they're getting boring. He keeps talking about that. And I love it because I think with a lot of these new tools, especially Kubernetes, because it focused largely on functionality and not on ease of deployment or ease of use. And I think that was one of my criticisms of it was, that how is the average person going to be able to deploy this if it's just a huge bundle of features that can be used wrongly or correctly, or and there's 5 different ways to actually deploy a container with different command lines that all seem to do the same thing at first, but then you realize later that those were bad patterns or whatever. So I love that it's getting boring and that that we can hopefully start focusing on some more opinion stuff, and like for the average developer who's maybe they're not doing IoT, they're just doing web services on the internet, maybe some worker things, and maybe it's legacy apps, like show us some patterns and have the tools actually, like let's filter out all of the things and just focus on that. I think it would actually be cool to have Kubernetes books that were like Kubernetes for hosted web apps built in the last 10 years. Like filter everything out and then only show them a fourth of the features or a fifth of the features that are for that problem set.
I think that would actually be a great thing to do, right? Like very, very specific content, which ends up being closer to what people want to buy anyway, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, I mean, you've got your like Docker for Node.js course, right? And like that's fantastic because people who are using Node or who are doing front-end development have very different patterns from people who are doing, like back-end web service, not in Node sort of stuff. It's a compiled language, right? So like their Docker file is going to look totally different. So like it's not quite cookbooky. It's actually like it's a specific and applied, and that's great stuff.
So I think one of my favorite DevOps things is Matthew Skelton's DevOps Topologies site, where he goes through the different organizational patterns that people have and they're trying to use with DevOps and anti-patterns. And I think in general, I think there's a deployment and delivery pattern that gets customized or specified for each of those topologies. But I think particularly in the case for a Kubernetes, like you may need a cookbook for each of those patterns. those organizational patterns, because the specifics are so different, and Kubernetes is a distributed system toolkit. So like, you have to create your own opinion, and there's a Word doc or Excel, Google Sheet or something I was looking at the other day that someone had compiled literally a list of 100 Kubernetes related deployment tools. And so there's this massive ecosystem, and it's cool that people are developing and sharing these things, but it's super clear that of the lack of influence on an opinionated deployment pattern like has had on the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's true. I'm trying to think of another. I mean, maybe you could argue that's the same thing with, like maybe deployment tools we had in the past with maybe Chef or Puppet. Maybe they were very unopinionated, but I always felt like you could never get in quite as much trouble with them as you could with some of the cool tools that we have now, like Kubernetes, where and maybe that's just because of the power, like because Kubernetes has so much functionality and power in it, and it was truly written by operators for operators, at least in my opinion. Like it's a perfect example of let's create a toolkit, and then maybe they should. It's almost I wish the branding and marketing was a little bit different. It's like, here's a low-level toolkit. You need something else first. Like you need to pick a deployment toolkit on top of Kubernetes.
Right.
Yeah. Almost like where was I recently? Basically helping you choose how you're going to use Kubernetes before you even use it. Like when you're on the site and it walks you through. Oh, I know what it was. I was on Xbox's website looking at new games to play, and they actually have this wizard, totally unrelated, but they have this wizard that walks you through just basically big clicky buttons that say, which kind of gamer are you? And it takes you down this path, and then it says, what kind of games do you like? What's your audio video setup? Do you have family? Like all these things. And then it decides at the very end, it says, well, here's the Xbox you want, because there's now like a dozen models, and here's the games you would like that you should look at. And I love to show people the landscape document with CNCF, where it's a sort of shock value of like, here's this gigantic PDF that's 1,000 tools. Good luck.
Dude, every time, oh my God, like I don't even remember when it was. Someone posted this like just really frustrated question, like, well, how the hell do I even do XYZ in a cloud native way? And I don't know if it was like the president of the CNCF or some other freaking asshole in this context. He literally just posted a link to the goddamn to the landscape page, and I wanted to like headbutt somebody through the internet. Like, you click on it, it's just like, cool. You just literally shot a shotgun of BS and marketing.
Yeah.
Like, it was like the least helpful response I've ever seen in my life. And it was like super frustrating for me, and I wasn't even facing down that question. But like, like the customer obsession in me was just like, this was grotesque. I just couldn't even believe it that just happened.
Yeah. Don't show that with a straight face. Jerome Pedizzoni does a similar thing in his Kubernetes workshops, where he says, okay, this is what Kubernetes. He's giving you the intro, like this is your first 20 minutes in Kubernetes. He's like, this is what the architecture might look like, and he shows up this fantastic diagram that's like what an AWS full-on advanced production diagram would look like, and you can't read anything on it because it looks like it's a mess. It's a spaghetti web. Right. And then you go to the next slide, and you realize you were just basically trolled. And it was like, yeah. Let's not get there yet. That's like the advanced stuff that maybe someday you'll look at, but really you don't have to worry about that yet.
Like, you're going to get 90% of the value of the tool with 3 machines. Right. And we just do the vanilla stuff. One of my biggest complaints about Kubernetes in general is just like, I love composability, but like they took it to they exploded the components out way too far and wide, to the point where there were no sane defaults. It was kind of like the opposite of a Docker approach, which was kind of like batteries included but replaceable. I thought, pre-swarm mode, like Docker great level of composability. It wasn't too much, but wasn't too little either.
Yeah.
It was approachable and a great API.
And that's a hard thing to do, right? A hard thing to pull off the middle of the ground approach that.
Yeah,
that
super hard.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, and as frustrating as facing certain limitations in, say, like an included deployment workflow, whether you're talking about Swarm or ECS or whatever, having to build your own kind of from scratch, now you have to build those abstractions of like, well, should I create, everyone needs a load balancer to expose their service, and like, should I invest in creating something that creates all these little resources that people need in some way, or do I let people like write in their deployment YAML directly, and like, how do I try to keep it dry? Do I even try to keep it dry, etc. So, I'm glad that the community is figuring it out, but I would say that it's just obviously a tremendous amount to try and keep up with, and like make good decisions. And so when you're feeling that pain, like, know that at least everyone else is along there with you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, I think letting the community figure it out is kind of like, it's great on one hand and it's really garbage on the other, because it's taken 3 years before we've had solid patterns, before we've had this thing is like continuously evolving and it's just really slow. But people have been trying to pursue Kubernetes for multiple years in like a manageable way. And I still don't think that they're there, really. Like, even personally, like, I threw in the hat on trying to DIY. Like, I just say, give me your managed option.
That's right.
Like, I mean, I could certainly do it, but there's no value add. Like, for me, it's not a force multiplying tool. Just not that interesting.
Yeah, and I think that since we're really talking to 3 people that have been in the weeds with this stuff, for those of you listening, I'm just going to guess that the recommendation, you would agree with the recommendation that whenever you do an orchestrator, especially Kubernetes, if there is a managed option, take it. And if there's a distribution option, that's second best. And I would say the third best is roll your own, even though you maybe want to be geeky, like maybe do that in your lab and you want to play with stuff, great. If you want to maybe have sort of a experimental cluster just so that you can learn the stuff, that's fine. But I think for a company, an organization, you're not going to be there forever, and someone has to take it over. And a lot of people don't take that into consideration when they're building out these fancy open source tools. So I always would rather have that managed option because it's much more sustainable. There was someone recently on Reddit this week, I think, that was saying, it was a sort of conversation about Swarm versus Kubernetes, and they said, I don't see what the big deal is with Kubernetes. In 4 hours, I had my deployment working and everything was fine, and it came to find out that they were using Kubernetes managed on Google Cloud, which that's the goal, right? That's what we want. We want this easy tool.
Yeah, use that all day long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they right now I think they're the best place to be if you're going to do managed Kubernetes. They're the fastest to deploy and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, and if you are going to run your own, you need to develop and test a cluster upgrade path and node replacement path, like as part of your your original project. Like, don't delay that, because what you want to discover is all of the challenges of like actually performing cluster upgrades and keeping up to date in your own environment with all of your load balancers and all this stuff that drew you to deploy that on-prem or wherever it is, and automate the heck out of that so that you can actually keep up to date. Because I know people who are stranded on 1.6 or 1.7 or whatever because they don't have time to update their ingress controller setup or whatever.
Yeah, and they didn't maybe test it, and that's some great advice. Like before you go into production with really any of these tools, but especially Kubernetes, because it doesn't have a one-click auto update feature or anything like that. That you definitely need to take that staging cluster and deploy it on an old version, and then update all the tools. Like I have everything on an older version, maybe just one version old. Update all those tools as if it was in production and see if the update path was satisfactory. Because I think it's easy when it's not easy on any of the components, and when one component needs to be updated, you maybe need to update that separately from everything else, and that update is going to be different, and it gets really hairy. And I do like the swarm update path of just doing a Docker update on a node, or really just replacing nodes with newer versions. But the reality is on Swarm, once you get a full-fledged cluster too, that's still going to be problematic, because now you've got containers running your load balancer. You've got other services in there that are all going to be, they're going to have to swap nodes, because you're going to want to update those nodes, which means usually rebooting. Yeah, there's just a lot to it. And that's
really like, I never want to get to that point. Like you don't ever want to have like the one big ass cluster, right? Mm-hmm. Like it really, like you're always going to, and I don't know why this has not been a higher priority at Docker. Like I was talking to them about this in 2015 about cluster federation. It's like, look, in reality, like clusters shouldn't be pets either. And if you're building a system that requires them to be pets, like you're letting everybody down. They shouldn't be pets for the same reason that like our virtual machines shouldn't have been pets. Right. So like the first thing I do is I create a little book, and I put a little like a label on the front of it that just says hammer. And it says like, this is exactly what I need to do in order to just destroy everything safely, right? Like here's the DNS that needs to change. Here's the data that needs to be replicated and migrated. And like this checklist of the actual state and resources that identify our services uniquely. And I can spin those up wherever. I can, like lease some colo space and, get some F5s or whatever and get some U's and throw my stuff on there up on like, just on virtual machines if I want to, if I have that little book. If you let yourself just like, oh yeah, we're running production in our Kubernetes cluster, like singular, like you're going to have a bad time. I don't care if it's a Kubernetes cluster or a Docker cluster or your VMware cluster or whatever it is, like it's going to be bad.
That's the new street cred. The street cred is no longer I'm running Docker or I'm running Kubernetes. I honestly don't care if you're running any of those tools. It's that how much of your stuff can I take down and you quickly redeploy it? Like, can I take down servers and nothing happens? I mean, that, Chaos Monkey is great and all that, but can I just kill this container? Or can I, what if, those servers disappear in AWS or in DigitalOcean or whatever? How long will it take you to have everything fully back up? And that recovery is, to me, the true street cred of DevOps is like, we might have great backups and they might be hourly or whatever, but if you don't have that process just like almost entirely automated for recovery on that, I would prefer you work on that than deploy a new fancy orchestrator.
Yeah, forget about that. All right, like that's like the least interesting thing to me possible. It's like I don't even care. Like, oh, we're running the previous version of Istio or something like that. I was like, well, does it work? Do you actually have any problems? Is there like a major security vulnerability? Is it being attacked? Like, what? Why are we putting our effort into this?
Right. Well, and along with that recovery capability, you get the ability to update and roll out changes to your base images. So whether that's, an improvement in a logging subsystem or, a Docker upgrade and so forth, and you can set up clusters dedicated to testing and run platform level tests against them, so that before you roll that image, and by image I mean like virtual machine image or whatever it is that you're running your container cluster nodes with, before you deploy that, you've actually tested your base artifacts for that cluster, so that when they do roll into like an environment that other people are going to be using, you can say, yeah, this passed our 45 whatever platform tests.
Yeah.
And like that's part of being an engineer, and like having a robust and engineering process for delivering service to whoever your internal and external customers are, in my view.
I like it. Well, we have gone past our hour, but that's just because these are great conversations, and I am so glad to have you both on the show. This is stuff that we could talk about all day. We're definitely going to do this again because I think we should be talking about security, and there's so many other topics that we should cover. Like diving into all the security stuff is going to be a fun thing. But thanks again for being on the show. You can find Steven on Twitter and Jeff on Twitter at the links below. Don't forget to get your copy of Docker in Action, which is available where all books are sold. And the coupon directly from Manning, I believe, is in the chat, so you can get 40% off that. Real quick, where other than Twitter, where else can people find you on the internet if they want to reach out? Jeff?
Twitter is really the best place. We're doing some new exciting work at gotopple.com, but it's really not a whole lot there yet. But Twitter I try to centralize everything there.
Cool.
So you can reach me on Twitter, or I have a site, nodramadevops.com, that I'll share, where I talk about DevOps topics 3 times a week is the target.
Wow.
A lot of security, a lot of containers, a lot of AWS cloud. So,
well, good on you for 3 times a week. I'm one of those standard people that my blog entries sometimes are not in the same year. So I'm glad you're sharing.
I have to be particularly motivated these days to actually get one out. I have something like 175 drafts.
You can't commit. You can't commit.
No.
Well, thank you, Brett, and thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and thank you all for watching the show. Of course, we'll be back here next Thursday. We might have guests, we might not, but we'll definitely. If you want to have these 2 great authors of the Docker in Action book back on the show, please say so by thumbs up on this video. Thumbs up on this video. I just made up a new word. Thumbs in. And then also just say something in chat if you or want to have topics for them to talk about in the future. If you had questions we weren't able to get to, sorry about that. I'll try to answer them in chat real quick after the show goes, after we stop the show. But we all have a hard stop to get to the next thing we're going to do. And thank you so much. We'll see you next week on YouTube Live.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.